Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Markela Petrakis, the Assistant Director of Maliotis Cultural Center. And on behalf of the entire MCC team, it is my joy to welcome you here this evening to an interview with George PELECANOS entitled George PELECANOS, The Vocation of an Author, brought to you by Maliotis Cultural Center in the Department of Literature and History at Hellenic College. Before we begin our presentation, please allow me to share a little bit about Maliotis Cultural Center. The center's mission is to promote Hellenic culture and language. We pursue our mission through diverse programming, including lectures, seminars and conferences, Greek concerts and dance performances, student engagement, traveling and permanent exhibits, and Hellenic American community events, and through the support of patrons and viewers like you. The Maliotis Cultural Center also serves as the main social and cultural gathering place for the students of both Hellenic College and the Holy Cross Greek Orthodox School of Theology. If you enjoy this event, please consider supporting the center by donating on our website, www.maliotis.hchc.edu, or making a check out to Maliotis Cultural Center, and by attending our other upcoming events that are free and open to the public. On Friday, April 7th at 10 a.m., join us for an open working rehearsal with Irini and the Rasa String Quartet as they workshop the project Greek Refugee Songs, which was funded by the Live Arts Grant 2022 of the Boston Foundation. The goal of this project is the creation of arrangements of Greek traditional songs from Asia Minor for string quartet and voice by Grammy-nominated arranger Gonzalo Grau. What makes this open working rehearsal unique is the dialogue between the Greek tradition and Western classical music, and the musicians who will be playing this music for the first time. If you've always been interested in this process, please join us for this free event Friday, April 7th at 10 a.m. April 17th, Maliotis will host the Federation of Hellenic American Societies of New England's Youth Easter Barbecue event, with lambs on the spit, dancing, live music, and more. On April 17th, the day after Easter, and Patriots Day from 1 to 6 p.m., free admission to all who RSVP. That same morning, Maliotis cheers on the Greek marathon runner Athanasios Karvouniaris at the Boston Marathon as he competes among the professional men's brackets ages 40 to 49. On April 23rd, MCC will host a live performance of the tragedy Alcestis with famous Greek actor Dimitrios Lalos and company. This ancient Greek tragedy by Euripides will be performed in Brookline in ancient Greek with English subtitles for an English-speaking audience. Last year, this event sold out. You can buy your tickets online through Eventbrite with Generation Y Productions. You can learn more about these and other offerings on our website, Instagram, Facebook, or through our Maliotis newsletter, which you can sign up for at the greeting table at the back of the room. Tonight's event, co-hosted by Maliotis Cultural Center and the HCHC Department of Literature and History, is an intimate interview by Dr. Ryan and Dean Petrakis of Hellenic College with Emmy-nominated writer and successful Greek-American George PELECANOS. A reception with Loukoumades will follow. Tonight's moderator is Dr. Timothy Petrakis. Dean Timothy Petrakis earned his doctorate in systematic theology from the Catholic University of America in 2003. And has been assistant professor of Orthodox Christian ethics at Holy Cross School of Theology since 2005. Before joining the seminary faculty, he taught at the St. Nicholas Orthodox Seminary in Seoul, Korea, and at Marymount University in Arlington, Virginia. In 2006, he became the director of the St. Helens Pilgrimage, the school's study abroad program in Greece, Mount Athos, Constantinople, and Jerusalem. And in 2020, he was named the interim dean of Hellenic College, America's oldest Orthodox Christian liberal arts college, a position in which he still serves. Dean Petrakis' book, The Ethics of Beauty, published in 2019 with St. Nicholas Press, presents a comprehensive Orthodox worldview in contemporary language and has sold over 6,000 copies. In 2019, he co-founded Beauty First Films, whose mission is to produce films that transport the viewer to a place of awe, beauty, and holiness, and he helps every year to design his liturgical seasons calendar available in the campus bookstore. Please join me in welcoming to the podium tonight's moderator, Dean Timothy Petrakis.
Thank you very much, Markela. And thank you, everyone, for coming tonight to this wonderful event that's been a long time in the making. And that gives me great joy to host Mr. Pelecanos, to host George here on our campus. You know, Hellenic College is such an ideal and wonderful place to those of us who know it, and it's such a blessing for us that you're here to help make it visible to even more people. Let me, before I introduce our guest, I want to introduce my co-moderator, Dr. Kathleen Ryan, who asked me to keep it short, very short. Let's see here, where in all my papers is it? Well, I will just say that Dr. Ryan is a full professor and the co-director of the Literature and History Department. She's also the director of our education program, which offers a minor in education. She's been at Hellenic College since 2004. She has a wide range of experience in the fields of literature and literacy. She teaches courses like children's literature, literature of vocation, American literature, world literature, education of children with special needs. She's a graduate of Boston College, and she completed her master's in English literature in Dublin as a student of Seamus Heaney before returning to write her doctoral dissertation at the University of Massachusetts Lowell. And I'm very pleased to count her as a friend and colleague and to be on the panel here tonight with her. So let me now introduce Mr. Pelecanos. He was born in Washington, D.C. He worked as a line cook, a dishwasher, a bartender, and a woman's shoe salesman before publishing his first novel in 1992. He is the author of 21 books set in and around Washington. I'm not going to read all the titles. No, don't read any of them. I'll read a couple. The titles like A Firing Offense, Down by the River Where the Dead Men Go, The Sweet Forever, and others. He's been the recipient of the Raymond Chandler Award in Italy, the Falcon Award in Japan, the Grand Prix du Roman Noir in France, and his novels Hell to Pay and Soul Circus were awarded the 2003 and then the 2004 Los Angeles Times Book Prizes. His novel The Turnaround won the Hammett Prize for Literary Excellence in the field of crime writing. His fiction has appeared in numerous publications. I'm going to skip some. He's an award-winning essayist. He's written for the New York Times, the New Yorker, the Washington Post, GQ, Sight and Sound, and others. Esquire magazine called him the poet laureate of the DC crime world, and that's certainly true. Entertainment Weekly, Stephen King once wrote that Pelecanos is perhaps the greatest living American crime writer. And on his bio, Mr. Pelecanos would like to point out that Mr. King did use the word perhaps. So much for his novels, essays, and short stories. I mean, that would be enough to be a fabulous career. Let's think about his work for the screen. He was a producer, writer, and story editor for the acclaimed HBO dramatic series The Wire, which won the Peabody Award, the AFI Award, the Edgar. He was nominated for an Emmy for his writing on that show. And I remember at the time the show was running, some television critics, for some reason, especially in the Wall Street Journal, believe that this show was the most important thing ever done on television. He is a writer and co-producer on the World War II miniseries The Pacific. Indeed, his own dad fought in the Pacific as a United States Marine in World War II. And he was a writer and executive producer on the HBO series pronounced, is it Treme or Treme? Treme. He co-created and was showrunner on HBO's The Deuce, and his most recent show for HBO was the limited series We Own This City, which he served as co-creator, writer, and showrunner. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. He lives in Silver Spring, Maryland, and wherever he is shooting his latest film. Mr. Pelecanos, you may not remember the first time I reached out to you because it was a long time ago via Facebook Messenger in 2010. I had read an interview where you talked about your sons and how you raised them, and I remember saying to myself, that is the sort of person I would like to come visit Hellenic College. That was 2010, and although I was just a random stranger messaging you on Facebook with no introduction, you immediately said you'd be glad to do so. I don't know if you remember this, but it took another 10 years before I unexpectedly became the dean of Hellenic College, and I said, well, let's try before I'm done here as interim dean to bring you to campus. I also want to give a shout out to Father Demetrius Antokis. I ran into him at Clergy Laity last summer, and when I heard he was from Bethesda, I said, you don't know George Pelecanos by any chance, do you? and Father Stephen Zorzos. So they both have really been encouraging me to invite you here. We're very grateful that you've flown all this way. We're excited to ask you questions about your process as a writer, about where your heart for social justice, your eye for culture, and your ear for language comes from. In particular, the students and future students of our literature and history program here at Hellenic are excited to hear from an accomplished novelist and writer of teleplays and screenplays as they chart their own paths in literature and the arts. I think I'm going to stop there. I was going to potentially read what Father Stephen Zorzos wrote, but he just said this: after 5 minutes, you will feel like you've known him all your life. So thank you very much for coming. And Dr. Ryan, you want to kick us off with our first questions?
Thank you.
Thank you. Let me add my thanks for your presence here tonight. We are thrilled to have such a renowned author here at Hellenic College with us. And I'd also like to thank all of you for coming tonight. I see students, emeritus faculty, visitors. Welcome to Hellenic College, Holy Cross. The way this interview will take place is I'm going to ask Mr. Pelekanos a few questions about his novels. Dr. Petrakis will ask a little bit about his film, and then we'll open it up for a question and answer session. So thank you. So my first question, we just heard a wonderful introduction from Dr. Petrakis, and I'm wondering if you would like to add anything about your own background or your family history. And also, I'm particularly curious to know if you ever had a moment, an epiphany type moment, when you said to yourself or aloud, I know I want to be a writer.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have anything to add. That was pretty complete. And, you know, yes, I did have an epiphany moment. There's been a couple, you know, but I think when my dad took me to the Wild Bunch in 1969, Peckinpah's film, I walked out of there and I said, I want to make movies. That's what I want to do. And I always knew that somebody wrote movies because I would watch shows like The Twilight Zone, and which had very good writing, and always wait to see who had written that. You know, in many cases it was the sci-fi writer Richard Matheson. But, you know, what's a kid going to write about? So I was telling the doctor on the way over here that the big thing that happened in my life that made me want to become a writer was, and I'll try not to make this too long a story, but in 1968, I was 11 years old, and March 31st, 1968, I came out of St. Sophia, where my mom taught Sunday school, where I went my whole life, and across the street is the National Cathedral. And I heard a voice when I walked out of church, and I followed the voice across the street to the back of the National Cathedral because they couldn't let anybody else in. It was so packed. And there was like 1,000 people back there behind the cathedral in the gardens. And they had speakers mounted up on the wall. And I listened, but really I watched the people, how rapt their attention was. And that voice was Martin Luther King. And 4 days later, he was assassinated in Memphis on Thursday. So we had these tremendous riots in the wake of the King assassination in Washington, where the city, 3 corridors in the city burned down, basically. And that summer, my mom and dad said to me, "You're 11 years old. It's time to go to work. Go up to the corner and catch the bus downtown, and then transfer to the F Street line." And so the bus went down Georgia Avenue every day, which becomes 7th Street, and 7th Street had burned to the ground. But the people on the bus, I should tell you that Washington was about 75% black at the time. So the the people on the bus were working class black Washingtonians, and they looked different after the riots to me. They looked different than they had looked before. Keep in mind that I'm a kid, but I noticed that the posture was straighter. They were wearing earrings. Women were wearing earrings that said "Black is beautiful." They were standing taller. It's like it wasn't a fire; it was a rain that had come and cleared the streets. So I get to the diner, and it's my father and I, 2 Greek Americans, and an all-black crew, which is just 4 people. And then on the other side of the counter was white professionals wearing ties. And that counter was very symbolic to me, the division. And intellectually, I didn't understand it, but I knew that there was something happening there and that I wanted to tell that story. And the only way I knew to do that was to someday I'll be a writer. And that's what I've been doing my whole career, is talking about that division of race and class, and under the guise of, in the books, crime fiction, because it's an engine to talk about the social problems that I want to bring up. Sorry, I went on too long. It's kind of, you can't just encapsulate that. It has to be, you got to tell the whole. Yeah.
Your first novel, A Firing Offense, published in the early to mid-90s, takes place in the back streets, the very gritty streets of Washington. We meet Nick Stephanos, and he works in a store named Nutty Nathan's, which I love the name of the store, Nutty Nathan's. It's an electronics store that sells items such as toasters and televisions. And there's a young stock boy who goes, and the boy's grandfather, begged, and Nick agrees. And then the story takes off, and all of a sudden the reader is taken through those somewhat violent, gritty streets of Washington. And I wondered, as you wrote that first novel, what personal experiences did you draw from to create it?
I'd worked a series of jobs like that, and the character in that book goes through a transformation and leaves his old life behind. And that's what happened to me, as I sort of burned everything down and tried to become a writer. I had no idea what I was doing. I wrote that book in longhand in notebooks. And even after I was done, I rewrote it many times. It took me a year to write it. It's the longest I ever worked on a book because I didn't know what I was doing. And then I sent it up to New York blind. I didn't have an agent or anything like that. And I only sent it to one publisher. They bought it. A year later, they got back to me. They left a message on my answering machine and said, "We just picked this up off the slush pile, and we want to buy it." So that was, without me being him in particular, that was my story. And as far as like it was just me living my life. At the time, I was working in a bar, and I would work in the kitchen during the day, and at night I would step behind the bar, and I was downtown, and I was meeting all kinds of people. Actually, it was a bar where a lot of cops drank off duty. So, I mean, I had in my 20s, I lived a very full life. And I'm sure there's people in here that want to be writers and are going to try to be writers. That's my main advice to you, is live a full life and read a lot.
Which brings me to the second book I wanted to ask about. This book is called The Man Who Came Uptown, and it is a particular favorite of mine. In the book, we meet this young man, Michael Hudson, who's in prison because of a role he took a part of in a robbery. And there in the prison, he meets Anna Kaplan, who is the prison librarian. And she inspires Michael to fall in love with reading. And that theme of the transformational power of reading resonated with me. And the way you developed the theme all through the book fascinated me. And I wondered, what inspired you to include this theme of the wonder and power and joy of reading in the plot of this particular book?
Okay, so I've been, I guess about the last 20 years, I've been doing reading programs in prisons and jails and juvenile detention centers. And so I had a lot of material, first of all. You know, I don't want to act like I'm, totally a philanthropist or something like that, because when I go into jails or prisons, I come out with a lot of material. Because I talk to these guys and listen to them, and there's poetry in the language, and they have some fantastic stories. So I get something out of it too. And I met this woman who was the jail librarian down at the D.C. jail, which is like Rikers. It's not a prison; it's a holding jail. If you're awaiting trial, or if you're violated on your, it's a parole violators and people like that. And at the time, they didn't have a physical library, so every day she put books on a cart, and she'd take them to the various blocks, and the guys would get in line, and she'd talk to them. And she got to know them, and so she knew, like, yeah, I picked this out for you, John, you know, that kind of thing. But the idea of it, you know, the book is really a love letter to reading and books, and what the power of them, especially in a place like that, because if a man or a woman takes a book into a cell at night and opens that book and starts reading, there's no door on that cell anymore. You're free because you're somewhere else. You're not in that cell anymore, and that's what reading does for you. It allows you to go someplace that you are either unwilling or unable to go in your life. You find it in a book. So that was, and I wanted to do that. That's my last book, my latest book, because, you know, I'm in my 60s. I don't know how many chances I'm going to get to talk about things like that. You know, it's not, the future's not promised to anybody. So I wanted to do that before I kick.
Thank you. I have one more question, and I'm assuming that everyone can hear me okay? Great, okay, thank you. So my last question, and then I'll turn it over to Dr. Petrakis, but my last question is about your novel, Shame the Devil, which, once again, in this book, your gifts for plot twists, fast action, incredible quick dialogue is evident. But as I read the book, I was deeply moved by your ability to capture the deep human suffering involved in pain and loss, because the novel opens up in a pizza store, and a robbery takes place, and the robbery goes terribly wrong, and there are many victims, and including one 5-year-old boy who was struck by the driver of the getaway car. So we have these victims come together in a support group, but what struck me was your ability to capture that deep human suffering and the need for spiritual comfort when we experience such senseless loss. So, as you said yourself, often your books are generally described as crime fiction, but this book and many others seem to me to go beyond that genre of crime fiction. And I wondered how you yourself would describe the genre or the type of novel that you write.
Well, I'm proudly a crime writer, and I need something. I can't write a book that doesn't move. You know what I mean? That doesn't have an engine, and or conflict, and the highest form of conflict is life and death, right? So you go to the crime novel for that. But I'm not really interested in I'm least interested in the crime part of it. I'm more interested in the characters and what they go through and their arcs and the setting. You know, what people. There's always in these books. There's always somebody who's sort of a hidden protagonist. It's like the guy who goes to work every day as a dishwasher. He might not be the obvious protagonist of the book, but he's the one that sort of survives at the end, because those are people that I look up to, because they don't, why a corporate CEO goes to work every day. You know why a lawyer goes to work every day. There's nothing wrong with that, but they're highly rewarded financially. But what makes a guy get up and wash dishes every day? That's heroic to me. Knowing that guy, knowing that he's never going to be much more than that, but there's nobility in it. So those are the kinds of things. That's why I end up writing a lot about diners and places like that. The workplace in these, I found when I was younger, and I worked in these places, retail, bars, all that. My favorite job was as a woman's shoe salesman. Loved that job, best job I ever had. But like if you're sort of an outcast type, you can go to work in those places and find a family. And I'm just interested in that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good questions.
Thank you. And I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Petrakis.
Dr. Ryan, if your questions have been so good, if you have another one, you can go ahead. Do you have another one? No, for now? Not for now?
A million questions.
Yeah, I do
but
too.
I'll let it.
Yeah, so let me start with a more general question about your childhood experience in Greek American culture or in Greek culture, and can you say a little bit more about? You hinted at it with the story from the restaurant and the counter, about how that prepared you for a life of observing subcultures or cultures all across this country, and how that was a preparation for a diverse outlook on life.
Yeah, I just feel really fortunate that my parents made me go to work at 11 down there, and because it socialized me with adults at a very young age, I learned a lot of lessons. Not all the lessons were positive. I saw bad sides of people too, but it was super valuable. By the time I was of age to go out into the world and work jobs not in my father's diner, I was prepared. I was well prepared to deal with all those things, and that I'm losing track of the question though.
But no, just the extent to which awareness of your own ethnic identity helped you to sympathize with other subcultures.
Oh yeah, well, yeah, right. So my dad was my hero. He's, like was mentioned, he was a Marine Corps combat veteran of the Pacific, and a tough but gentle guy, but didn't dropped out of high school, had no higher education, wore an apron his whole life, provided well for the family, but you know what I mean? Like when you look up to somebody like that, then you don't look down on other people that you meet on the street that are also working class and workers. And because Washington was the racial makeup was the way I described it. I was from a very young age always around people that weren't like me, and I didn't. And that's what messes people up is they look at people and they see the other. It didn't feel like the other to me. It felt very normal to be around different kinds of people. It wasn't just blacks. We have a big Hispanic population in D.C. and then the playing field is where you really. I played a lot of pickup basketball. I wasn't great, but I played every day. And you'd go into places in the city that were neighborhoods not like yours, and you'd find games, and that's really where you learned a lot about other people too. And I was always curious.
Thank you for that answer, and just that thought of you at 11 listening and observing on the bus and taking in all that material for, crafting your worldview and then your art, unknowingly. My second question has to do with this. We feel, we've felt now for decades that somehow there's a kind of implacable opposition between reading and film, or between reading and television. And, you're doing great in both. And so much of that seems to be your ability to hear the poetry, as you said, and the uniqueness in various language, and bring that into your television writing. I don't really have a question out of that, but if you can, maybe I'll turn that into a question about process. So if you're writing a show set in New Orleans, how much time are you spending in New Orleans before you start writing, and what are you doing to hone in on who people are and what this unique culture is? The unique culture of that place.
Yeah, it's not much different than what I did in my childhood, which was observing people and listening to them talk. Part of my job is to. I don't do this much anymore, but part of my job has been to go into a bar and have a beer, and listen to people. That's on. I'm working then too, but when I go to a place like New Orleans, or when I first went down to New Orleans for Treme, it felt very familiar to me because Treme, New Orleans is also a majority black city, and I love music, so it was everywhere. And what I did was I'd go out at night and just walk around, and I'd drop in on bars where there was music playing, and then in New York when I did the Deuce, I just decided, well, I'm never gonna take a cab, or on my job they picked me up in a van and drive me to set, and I didn't do that. I would take the subway every day, and the subway in New York is kind of a miracle. Most of you know that. You can get off work at 3 or 4 in the morning out in Bay Ridge and still get on a subway and come be in Manhattan in 20 minutes, Like you can get anywhere on a subway 24 hours a day. And that's how I learned the city. It's being proactive and getting out there and staying engaged.
My final question is just about process. My assistant told me that Flannery O'Connor had a favorite snack while writing. I tried that with M&Ms, and it didn't work out so well for me. But do you have a favorite time of day or a place for writing? How much of a TV series do you have to pre-write before you can start filming? Do you have to have a plan for all the episodes of a season, or? But let me start with the more prosaic of: is there a place that you write, a time of day, anything that helps you focus on your craft?
Yeah, well, for novels, I have it's a very rigid sort of schedule, and where I am is there's a room in my house where I write my office, and I go in there at 9 in the morning, and it's not any different than what my dad did. I look at it like that. He turned the key in the magazine, on the front door at the same time every day, and so do I. And my wife and kids laugh at me because I get dressed for work every day too. I don't go down there in sweatpants or anything like that. I dress like I'm going to work, and I work. I write until a late lunch, and then I do something physical in the afternoon. Whatever ride a bike or whatever, kayaking, whatever I want to do, and then I come back at night and I rewrite for a couple hours what I did in the morning, so that I'm able to move forward. And when I'm writing a book, I work 7 days a week, because I just feel like when you leave that sort of creative tunnel, it's very difficult to get back into it. Television is a lot different. You have a writer's room. It's a process where you break, what they call, you break the scripts. It takes several days to beat out an episode with file cards and everything, and when at the end of those 3 or 4 days, you've got file cards up on a board, like a cork board, with all the scenes in order. And then you create a beat sheet, which you can then hand the writer. He or she has a map now, a blueprint to go write the script. And every show is different. I like, because of my personality, I like to have everything written before we shoot. But my partner on The Wire, David Simon, comes from the newspaper background, and he couldn't work unless it was 5 minutes to midnight. And so on that show, we were shooting episodes before we had written subsequent episodes, and I didn't like that at all. It was really nerve-wracking to know that we didn't know where the show was going while we were shooting it. And the show turned out great. I mean, that's his process, right? He wasn't scared. At least I don't think he was. But being in a writer's room is a lot for novelists. Some novelists can't handle it because it's like going to writing school, which I've never done. In writing school, like in Iowa, for example, the other students sit around and critique your work, and I don't like that. And it can get brutal, like that's stupid. That's a stupid idea, or you're writing. It took a lot to get used to, and a lot of novelists just say that's not for me, because you're in charge when you write a novel. When you're in television, there's a lot of people giving you notes and things of that nature that it can be hard to take. But I ended up liking it. I like the experience.
Thank you very much. Do we have audience questions yet?
Hi, George. Thanks
Hi.
for coming to talk to us tonight.
Thanks.
So I imagine you canvassed Baltimore then before you wrote for the show.
Yeah, Baltimore's 40 minutes from Washington, so yeah. But I got to know it pretty well.
So during that period from 2002 to, I want to say, 2008, what is
Yep.
your fondest memory of interacting with the locals in Baltimore?
Thanks. That's a good question. We did very little set work, so it was mostly locations, and that was a night show. There was a lot of nights on that show where we worked all night, and we kept a pretty. Baltimore's a dangerous place, and that's for real. It's not something you just hear, and it's real. But we got to know the people in the neighborhoods, and we let the set open for them. We had a lot of kids hanging around because you have what they call craft services, which is there's always food out and candy and stuff like that. And a lot of these kids were hungry, so we let them come and hang around. And the security people that we used in Baltimore were like ex-gangsters and stuff like that, so they knew everybody in the neighborhoods, and everybody knew them. Some of those people, when they were teenagers, they said to us, can you put me on, And so on this last show I did in Baltimore, We Own This City, one of those kids is running one of my departments for me. He's in middle, he's now in his 40s, and he has a family, and he's not the only one. And that's really, it was really nice to go back there and work with that crew again, and people that you had sort of given an opportunity to that had taken it and run with it, you know. Thanks.
Thank you so much for coming here. My question is, for people who want to get into writing, say, film or books, I know you said you didn't have any formal educating in writing, so what would you recommend for resources for them to learn?
Well, I feel like as far as books go, novels, anybody can write a novel. And it is a meritocracy, although there is some, you know, if you're the son or daughter of someone, you might have a leg up. But generally, no. The publishers want good books. And again, I recommend that you read a lot all the time. You know, like when I was a senior in college at the University of Maryland, I took this crime fiction class that sort of changed my life, and I decided that I wanted to do that. But I didn't try to write a book for 10 years because I knew that I had to learn on my own how to write. And what I did was I read, let's say, 2 novels a week for 10 years. And it was at that time where I started to think, maybe I can do this. Like I'm starting to figure it out a little bit, I thought. Screenwriting is a little bit different. You gotta get in the door somehow. And one thing I would recommend is that you try to get a job in a writer's room as an assistant. And because if you get a job on set, like say a PA, production assistant, you're never going to become a writer because you're on, that's a technical job, and you're around grips and camera people and all that. That's a different track. But if you're in the writer's room, you're sitting around with writers all day, and you're taking notes for them, and you're getting them coffee and all that stuff. And that seems like it's kind of crummy, but you're actually learning a lot. And not just that, but you, if you hang in there long enough, just about, well, a good amount of the people that worked on all 5 years of The Wire in the writer's room ended up becoming screenwriters. Not on that show, but I would give somebody scenes of one of my scripts and say, go write these and bring them back to me tomorrow. And then, you know, when they went out to their next job, if I got a call and they had done a good job, I would boost them. You know, I'd give them a good recommendation, and a couple of those people are running shows now. But it all started there in like the most lowly job in the writer's room. But that's the track.
Thank you again for coming.
Thank you.
And I really enjoy some of the answers to some fabulous questions from earlier. My question is from The Wire. What is the inspiration and the purpose behind Hamsterdam? I think that's a very unique part of the show. I've never seen that anywhere else on any other type of show, so I'd really like to know that.
Well, you're talking to the right guy, because I made up Hamsterdam. And it was one of those things where there was a scene where they had jacked up, the police had jacked up these kids, and they were frisking them against the wall. And all I was trying to do was get out of the scene. You always want to put a button on a scene and make it funny if you can. And I guess it was Dom Lombardozzi or one of those guys said to the kid, we're going to drive you down the street and take you to Amsterdam. And I just figured that kid wouldn't know what Amsterdam is, right? So he said, I ain't going to no damn Hamsterdam. And now it's on T-shirts all over. People are wearing T-shirts. But the concept of it, if that's what you really meant, was really interesting. It was we started out, there's a lot of argument in the writer's room, and we started out discussing the season and what if drugs were illegal? Because everybody says that as a possible solution. And we thought, yeah, okay, we'll do that. We'll make it illegal in one part of the city and as an experiment and see what happens. But rather than just come to a utopian conclusion that, yeah, this could work, after much discussion and argument, we saw that it couldn't work. And so what started out as a bunch of liberals with good intentions ended up in failure on the screen because we saw that if you did do that, you'd just have a bunch of junkies in a few square blocks of the city. You're pushing the problem into one place instead of keeping it citywide. And that's not the solution. So I thought it was really interesting that we honestly answered our own question in the show. And it wasn't the answer that we thought we were going to get. And this had come after Kurt Schmoke, who was the mayor of Baltimore at one time, innocently said, they asked him at a press conference, what are you going to do about the drug problem? Do you think drugs should be illegal and legal? And he said, I think we should look at everything. And he lost the election, his re-election, because of that. He didn't say, let's legalize drugs. He just said we should keep an open mind. And that was enough for the people who ran against him to crucify him.
Hi.
Hi.
I see some similarities with Harry Mark Petrakis. You know him.
Yeah, I've read him.
Pretty sure that you've read some of his novels.
I have one in my bed, right in my bedstand, right in the drawer there.
You are.
Detroit.
Yeah, and you see a similarity there of his father, who was a priest, and you were going to the church. Has this your background affected your writing at all?
I mean, everything. Yeah.
Yes.
As far as the church goes, just I don't like to talk about what I believe and all that because I just don't. I don't. It's personal, but I think one thing you should get out of church is right and wrong. Knowing the difference between right and wrong, not. Look, my mother had more faith than anybody I've ever known. She was straight, even when she was about to pass. She had no fear because she was certain about that. But she never pushed it on anybody else, and she never said, "Well, it says in the Bible, so this is wrong and that's wrong." She never did that, and that taught me a lot. You have your private morality and try to live your life a certain way, but without pushing it on anybody else. And I think that has stuck with me.
The same with Petrakis. Thank you so much.
Okay.
It's a real thrill to have you here. Thanks for
Thanks,
coming.
sir.
I'm enjoying this tremendously. I want to take you back over something you've said a little bit about, but it's just fascinating to me. And the life of a novelist is lonely, and you say you're in charge when you're writing a novel and so forth. This business of being in the writer's room, completely interesting. Can you say a little bit more about that? How does it unfold? Is it taking you places you hadn't thought about? Who's there? Just love to get a picture of what it's like to be inside this writer's room.
Okay. Well, I described what happened with Amsterdam, how the writer's room changed the whole course of the concept. But when I'm building a writer's room, if I'm in charge of the show, I like to put a lot of different people in there who have different backgrounds and different opinions, because the one thing you don't want to happen is where everybody's agreeing with each other. And The Wire, more than any other show I worked on, was very combative in the room. It was a lot of tension all the time, and it wasn't polite argument off. It often got heated, and but it ended up making it a better show. And you had to have thick skin. To come out of something like that and create, a show like The Wire is very satisfying, knowing that all these people in this room did this thing, and in a general sense, the reason I like producing is because I love coming out on set at 7 a.m, coming out of the van, and there's 100 people there, and we're all and I consider them all to be artists. The, costumes, hair and makeup, picture cars, everybody is an artist, and we're making something together. When you're done, if it's a box set or something, a DVD, you're holding something in your hand that you all made as a group. And that's kind of fascinating to me as opposed to a novel. The other difference is that you watch it, which I find interesting, is that when you watch a television show, pretty much everybody sees the same show because because of that collaboration, it's very controlled by what the end product is. When you read a book, everybody reads a book differently. They have different images in their head. It's completely subjective to the reader. And I think that's kind of fascinating too, because as a writer, you can beat yourself up as a novelist trying to make it so descriptive that you're forcing everything on the reader, but it's not always good. Try to remember that people are in their own world when they're reading this book, and they're seeing things different than even you intended on the page.
Hey, George, big fan.
Hi.
Just a big question for you. I don't know where to go with this. The Wire or The Sopranos. I watch them back and forth. I try to decide which is my favorite. I know you might be a little biased, but if you were to decide, maybe, where would you come out on that? And what have people told you about when they rank their top 10 shows? I don't know. I think I'll probably watch The Wire one more time and then decide, but it's still something I debate. I talk with my friends. My brothers, they always try and push The Sopranos, but The Wire, it's every time I watch it again and again, there's always something really little I pick up that I missed the previous time. And so I'm not sure if anyone else has expressed that or if people have told you, this is where you rank, the HBO, Deadwood, Sopranos, The Wire, where it ranks, and I guess how people have reacted or what they've communicated.
Well,
to you.
I'd put those two at the top, and I'll probably surprise you, and I'll say The Sopranos. And the reason is it's more consistent. I rewatched it recently, all the seasons, and it's remarkably consistent. It's always great, pretty much. Because there's some things on The Wire that I can't watch because I was there all the time when we shot it. And some of those arguments that I described to this gentleman, I lost. And it still bothers me to see a scene where that I didn't like. And I think we could have done better, And so I mean, there was one night when I was in L.A. one night for something, and because I don't rewatch The Wire, and I happened to watch some of it, and I called David Simon up and I said, "Why did we shoot that scene in slow motion? That's bogus, And he said, "Don't rewatch," and he hung up on me. So I think, all in all, The Sopranos is the best. The Sopranos isn't really about anything beyond entertainment, and it's about family. It's a show about a family, but The Wire takes on bigger subjects, but I think they were more consistent.
I had two questions about the Pacific, which I really enjoyed.
Thanks.
To what extent did your father's experiences influence the content of it? And two, did you have a favorite episode within the Pacific?
Well, that wasn't a great experience, but I wrote the episode of when the Marines are on leave in Australia, and the guy falls in love with a Greek girl and he gets taken in by the family and all that. Because what happened in Melbourne is that it was the Allies were all there, the young men, and all the Australian men were off fighting somewhere, and they had a lot of love affairs with women in the city when they were on leave. And but that episode got rewritten by somebody else, and I didn't like that episode. Consequently, I think some of the best stuff I wrote got cut out of it. Let me put it to you this way. I think the battle scenes have never been equaled that were done on that show. That was some terrific filmmaking. And my father fought on Leyte, so his experiences were in the Philippines. But I did use some of his things he had told me, but my dad didn't tell me a lot because he, like a lot of men that were actually in combat, he didn't really want to talk about it. I learned more from his friends about what he did there than him telling me directly.
Hi, so I have two questions. You talked about how Sopranos is one of your favorite shows.
Yeah.
Now, what's your favorite book? And also, what is your least favorite scene that you had to either write and or produce?
Let's see. My favorite book is probably True Grit by Charles Portis. You've all seen the movies. It's a tremendous novel. And I reread Steinbeck a lot, and even though academics don't like Steinbeck, but I just think it's the kind of book that I aspire to write. Meaning, I want people of all walks of life to be able to read my books and be moved by them, if possible. My least favorite scene of stuff I've done. There's just, I always feel it can be better, I'll tell you my favorite scene. It was, if I can just do that, because is the episode 311 of The Wire when Stringer Bell and what's his name, his friend, you know it. They're up top on the roof of this place, and Avon Barksdale, they say goodbye to each other, and they've both betrayed one another, and the other guy doesn't know it. And I think it's as good as anything I've ever written, including anything in my books. But having said that I had a lot of help, meaning the actors, the way it was shot. It was shot with I was there that night. It was shot with long lenses so that everything bled out behind them, and it was a beautiful summer night, and it was just like a magical moment, and that's my favorite scene. Thanks.
Hi. So I was wondering, because especially considering America is a relatively new country, I find it very interesting that we have this kind of very clear idea of the American novel, whether it be Mark Twain to Cormac McCarthy. We have this very clear idea of an American novel, and they all follow these themes of sometimes very violent and grittiness and kind of blue collar, common people, and themes of inequality and, people working hard and rising to the top. And so I was wondering, do you have a favorite book that you think encapsulates this idea of, the American novel?
I mean, I would say probably Gatsby. The Great Gatsby is an almost perfect book. There's no such thing as a perfect book because you've got 100,000 words. You got to put them in order, and it's impossible. You know what I mean? But what do you think? Gatsby?
I probably wouldn't choose Gatsby. That's just me.
Well, that's why I'm asking your opinion.
Well, I wouldn't choose Gatsby. I would probably. I'm a big Nathaniel Hawthorne fan. I love Scarlet Letter. I'm sorry.
Oh, no.
I know. I love
Scarlet Letter almost ruined me for reading.
I'm sorry, but I do, especially in a small religious community like this, I think Hawthorne speaks to the need for open-mindedness and acceptance and love rather than judgment.
Okay, that's good. That's a good answer.
Thank you. Can I borrow a mic? I'm sorry. You asked me, though.
It's on.
Oh, it's on. I wanted to answer the question for you or comment on it. For this person right in the back here who asked about your favorite novel, I just wanted to comment that in his book, The Man Who Came Uptown, there's a beautiful scene where a group within the prison is discussing Of Mice and Men by Steinbeck. So I think you would really enjoy it. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah. Anybody else?
Oh, yes. As I was in the filmmaking industry in Pakistan, I can understand how difficult it is to prove your talents and telling that you can be a good writer. How do you think your talents were appreciated by Hollywood?
How they're appreciated. Well, I had a plan, and I was very naive. I wanted to, part of, in the back of my mind, the idea behind writing novels was that I thought, well, if I get published, it'll separate me from all the other people who are trying to write movies, and it'll put me in a different pool. And it took a long time, but that's what happened. Is they started calling me probably 8 books in. They started calling me and asking me to write scripts and to clean up scripts, do rewrites, uncredited rewrites, which I did. So that worked out. But if you want any level of control at all, you have to become a producer. And in television, the producer, the creator and the executive producer runs everything. And so Hollywood doesn't really like writers, and they don't respect them much. They look at it as something necessary, but they really don't respect them much. So my thing, when I got on the wire, at first I didn't know how to produce. I was determined to learn how, so that I could be in control eventually and control all aspects of the production. Because if you're just a writer for Hollywood, you're gonna be unhappy, I think, because you lose control. I mean, every script you see, especially take the Marvel movies, the comic book movies, they have 8 or 10 writers on them, and only a couple get credit because of the WGA, the Writers Guild, arbitrates them out. But how do you have anything of quality when you have 10 writers on something? It just doesn't, and it's not appealing at all. And that's what drove me into television producing.
One last question for me. So, in the education season for The Wire, in the meeting room with all the writers, there's Gus, and of course our favorite Dickensian aspect guy. I'm forgetting his name now, but he made a very interesting comment to Gus and the team that no one wants to see the newspaper or a show that outlines all of society's ills from all different aspects. That's sort of like what the gist of the line is, where he's sort of calling out Gus for wanting to get every sort of part of what's going on in Baltimore, and he just wanted to attack the school system. Hearing a great question earlier from this gentleman about the writer's room, was that a result of something going on in the writer's room where a writer felt, why are we trying to outline everything? Or was that more of a social commentary that you guys wanted to make? I thought it was a very interesting line.
I mean, that season was David's way of getting back at the Baltimore Sun, and where he had been a journalist for 20 years or something like that. And they brought in some editors from, I think from Philadelphia, who kept trying to make, according to David, I wasn't there, but they only, they wanted Pulitzers. They wanted to win awards rather than do intricate investigations into the city and all that. And that was his way of getting back at them, because he quit because of it. He got out of journalism, and of course it worked out for him. But it was really about the changing nature of newspapers and what their role is. And of course, the Baltimore Sun barely exists anymore. It's a very thin newspaper that is just not any good. And I don't know what your all's experience is up here with the Globe and all that, but newspapers have really gone downhill. That was just his comment on that.
Hi, George.
Hi.
What can you tell us in your experience as a writer and producer about the best way to give and to receive criticism?
Well, as a showrunner, I have to give notes to people, and the way to do it is to, as you're giving notes, is to praise people for all the good things they've done in the script as well. You don't want to demoralize anybody, and I give them two shots at it. After they turn in the script, they get to do a rewrite based on my notes, and then they get to do a polish. But before it goes to the network, I do a rewrite of the script, and I know that sucks for the writer, because somebody else is rewriting them, but it's what got done to me too, and it's what made me more determined to be in charge, so that I didn't have other people rewriting me. And hopefully, it's like when you go on a job interview and they say to you, where do you want to be in 5 years? I mean, the answer is I want to be where you are. I want to sit behind your desk. That's the honest answer. You should have ambition. And hopefully those people want the same thing. They want to have their own shows someday, and they have to go through walk through the fire a little bit to get there. But it's just being respectful. Just be respectful of people.
What about the best way to receive criticism?
Well, don't be a drama queen. I mean, don't throw a tantrum about it. You got to do. Everybody wants the same thing. Hopefully, is that you want a good show and you want a good script. So how are we going to get there together, without burning down a bunch of relationships? So, yeah, be gracious about it, and even if it's eating you up inside, try to be cool about the whole thing. Okay, I guess that's it.
Dr. Ryan, do you have any final comments or questions?
Sincere thank you to the audience for the wonderful questions, and a very heartfelt thank you for George Pelecanos for giving us such a memorable and wonderful night.
Thank you all. It's really nice. Thank you.
Did we get any attendees from Emerson after all? Did we have? No? Maybe? No?